right, we're diving deep today into something called model collapse. And we've got three articles to help us out with this from Nature, Scientific American, and Tech Radar.
Sounds like a fun mix.
Yeah. So model collapse, basically, it's what happens when AI starts learning a bit too much from, well, itself.
Yeah, it's almost like a dog chasing its tail. But in this case, the tail is AI-generated content. And as this content floods the internet, it ends up in the data that's used to train these new AI models.
And that's where the problems start. Like imagine you're trying to learn a new language, but all you've got are these AI-generated textbooks. You might pick up some of the rules, the grammar, but you're going to miss out on all the nuance, all the real-world stuff.
Exactly, and that's why model collapse is such a big concern. It's a degenerative process. As AI models train on this AI-generated data, they actually become less accurate over time.
So it's not just that they're, getting things wrong. It's that they're actually getting worse. And the Nature article outlined a couple of different ways this can happen, right?
Yeah, there are two main types of model collapse. The first one is early collapse, and that's when these AI models start losing those rare, those less common occurrences in the data. It's kind of like a map that's missing those little back roads, those less traveled paths.
Okay, so you can still get around, but you might miss some of the more interesting spots.
Exactly.
And then there's late collapse, which sounds a bit scarier. What happens there?
Well, in late collapse, everything just starts to look the same. The outputs, they become very similar, and they no longer reflect the diversity of the original data. Think of an artist who can only paint one type of face. No matter who the subject is, you lose all the unique details, all the expression.
So we've got these different types of model collapse,
hmm
and none of them sound particularly good. But why should we care? How does this actually impact us in the real world?
That's a crucial question. Think about all the ways that AI is being used today. Cybersecurity, healthcare, finance, even art and music. If those AI models start to collapse, well, the consequences could be really significant.
Yeah, and for example, in healthcare, the Scientific American article talked about AI being used for medical diagnosis. So if those models are trained on data that's missing those less common cases, they might not be able to spot those rare diseases.
Exactly. That could lead to misdiagnoses, delays in treatment. And it's not just healthcare. The Tech Radar article also highlighted cybersecurity as a major area of concern.
Okay, so how does model collapse play into cybersecurity?
Well, imagine you have an AI system that's designed to detect malware, but it's been trained on data that's increasingly made up of these AI-generated malware samples. It might start missing the human-crafted attacks because its definition of what is a threat, well, it becomes warped.
So it's like a digital immune system that can't tell the difference between a harmless cold and a deadly virus.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's a pretty unsettling thought.
Yeah, it is. And this isn't just a theoretical problem either. There have already been reports of AI-generated text becoming increasingly repetitive, lacking that creativity, that spark that you get from human writing. Some have even observed a decline in the quality of AI-generated images, with the outputs becoming blurrier, less detailed over time.
So we're already seeing these potential red flags out there.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that this affects creative fields like art and music too, right?
Absolutely. If AI music generators are trained on music that was, well, also composed by AI, you can imagine a scenario where all new music just starts to sound the same, lacking the diversity and originality that makes music so compelling.
Okay, this is starting to feel a little dystopian. Is there any hope here?
Yeah.
What are the researchers saying about combating this model collapse?
Well, it's definitely a challenge, but there are some promising avenues being explored. One of the things that the Tech Radar piece highlighted was the importance of data provenance, basically being able to track where data comes from and whether it's been generated by a human or by AI.
So like a digital fingerprint for data.
Exactly.
That way we could filter out the AI-generated content, make sure that the new models are being trained on these authentic human experiences and creations.
Exactly. And this could involve using things like blockchain technology or digital watermarking to create this tamper-proof record of where the data comes from.
Okay, that sounds pretty high-tech, but promising. What are some other approaches being explored?
Another key area is human curation. Basically, making sure that we maintain these high-quality data sets that are created by humans, sort of like a digital seed bank for AI.
Okay, so it's almost like going back to basics,
Yeah.
making sure that the AI doesn't lose touch with the real world and the richness of human expression.
Exactly. And there's a lot of interest in developing AI models that can continuously learn and adapt, rather than just regurgitating what they've seen before.
So teaching AI to be more like a student who's always learning and evolving. rather than just memorizing facts.
Precisely. And that involves developing algorithms that can effectively incorporate new information without forgetting old lessons.
Well, those are some encouraging signs. But it sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done.
There is, but the good news is there's a growing awareness of the challenges posed by model collapse, and researchers are actively exploring solutions.
Okay, so we've got data provenance, human curation, and continuous learning on the table. What else is being done to tackle this problem?
Well, there's this other approach that researchers are looking into. It's called data accumulation, and the idea is to use a mix of real data and synthetic data during training. So the models still have a good range of information to learn from, but you're not completely replacing real data with AI-generated stuff.
So like giving AI a balanced diet, mixing the old with the new, making sure it's getting all the nutrients it needs.
Exactly. And the key here is to create synthetic data that's, high quality. Data that actually reflects the real world with all its complexities and nuances.
Okay, so if we can crack that, we could reduce our reliance on AI-generated content. And that would, in theory, help prevent model collapse.
Right. And it's an area where there's a lot of exciting research happening.
That's great to hear. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the potential consequences of model collapse. We've touched on cybersecurity and healthcare, but what are some other areas where this could have a real impact?
Well, one area that immediately comes to mind is finance. Imagine an AI system that's being used to predict stock prices or assess risk in the market. If that system is trained on data that's heavily influenced by, let's say, AI-generated content, it could lead to some pretty inaccurate predictions, potentially even financial instability.
Right, it's like building a house on a foundation of sand. It might look stable at first, but eventually it's all going to come crumbling down.
Exactly. And then there's the impact on social media and online content. Think about those algorithms that curate our news feeds, that recommend stuff to us. If they're trained on data that's increasingly homogenized, lacking diversity, it could lead to these echo chambers, filter bubbles.
Right, where we're only ever exposed to information that reinforces our existing beliefs.
Exactly. And that could actually exacerbate the problems we're already seeing with misinformation and polarization online.
It's almost like AI is creating this hall of mirrors, where we're just constantly reflecting back on ourselves, never seeing a different perspective.
Yeah, that's a really powerful image. And it highlights why it's so important to address model collapse, not just as a technical challenge, but as a societal one.
Right, we need to be thinking about the broader implications of AI.
On our culture, our democracy, our very understanding of the world.
It sounds like model collapse could have far-reaching consequences, touching almost every aspect of our lives. But before we spiral into a deep existential crisis, let's talk about solutions. We've discussed data provenance, human curation, continuous learning. What other strategies are researchers exploring?
Well, one promising area is the development of what we call AI governance frameworks. And this involves establishing guidelines and regulations to make sure that AI is developed and used responsibly.
So not just focusing on the tech, but also putting the right guardrails in place.
Exactly.
So what would that look like in practice?
Well, it could involve things like setting standards for data quality, requiring transparency in AI systems, and even creating mechanisms for accountability when AI systems cause harm.
So it's not just about fixing the technical issues. It's also about making sure that AI is used ethically for the benefit of society.
Exactly. AI is a powerful tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. It's up to us to make sure that we're using it wisely with a deep understanding of its potential impact.
That makes a lot of sense. But AI governance is a pretty broad concept. What are some more specific steps that could be taken to address model collapse?
One important step is to promote data literacy. Among developers and users of AI, we need to educate people about the importance of data quality, the risks of model collapse, and, all the ethical considerations.
So raising awareness, empowering people to be more discerning about AI-generated content.
Exactly. And it's also about encouraging developers to be more transparent about their training data, about the limitations of their models.
Yeah, transparency is key, especially when AI is being used to make decisions that impact people's lives. But what about regulation? Do we need government intervention to address model collapse?
That's a really complex question. On the one hand, regulation can be a powerful tool for setting standards, for ensuring accountability. But on the other hand, we don't want to stifle innovation. We need to find that balance.
Right, encouraging the development of beneficial AI while also protecting against the potential risks.
Exactly.
It's a delicate balancing act.
It is, and there's no easy answer.
But it sounds like there's a growing consensus that we need to take model collapse seriously.
Yeah.
and that we need to start working towards solutions.
Absolutely. Model collapse is a real threat. It's growing, and it's something that we need to address collectively. We need to have these conversations, we need to do the research, and we need to work together to develop responsible, sustainable approaches to AI.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into model collapse. A little bit concerning, I have to admit. We've covered a lot of ground, the technical details, the potential impact on society, even some potential solutions. But it sounds like there's still a lot we don't know about this phenomenon.
There is. The research is still in its early stages. There are a lot of unanswered questions. For example, we're still trying to understand those thresholds, those tipping points for model collapse in different areas.
So it's like we're trying to figure out the right dosage for AI medicine. Too little might not be effective, but too much could be harmful.
Exactly. And we're also trying to figure out how to effectively combine real data and synthetic data during training. What's the optimal mix? How do we make sure that synthetic data actually complements the real data without overwhelming it?
Like finding the right recipe for AI stew.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And then there's this question of long-term resilience. How do we create AI systems that are robust to model collapse
Yeah.
over, extended periods of time?
Right, like does AI have a digital expiration date?
Yeah.
And if so, how can we extend its shelf life?
Exactly. And these are just a few of the many open questions. It's a fascinating area of research, and it's evolving rapidly. We can definitely expect to see a lot of new discoveries, a lot of new insights in the coming years.
Well, we've covered a lot here. The dangers of model collapse, the importance of addressing bias. But before we move on to our final segment, I'm curious to hear your take on something. You mentioned that research on model collapse is still in its early stages. But what are some of the most promising research directions that you're seeing right now?
That's a great question. One area that I'm particularly excited about is the development of new techniques for detecting and mitigating bias in AI systems.
Okay, bias in AI is a huge concern, especially as these systems are being used to make decisions that affect people's lives in healthcare, finance, criminal justice, and so on.
Exactly, and bias can creep into these systems in a lot of ways, through the training data, through the algorithms themselves. So as AI systems become more powerful, more pervasive, it's essential that we address this.
So are there any specific research projects or initiatives in this area that you're following?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting work being done on developing algorithms that can actually detect and mitigate bias in the data itself.
So like a digital filter that removes the impurities from the data before it's used to train the AI.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And there's also this growing interest in AI governance frameworks that specifically address bias.
So establishing ethical guidelines, requiring transparency, creating mechanisms for accountability.
Exactly.
It sounds like there's a real push to make AI more fair, more equitable.
Yeah.
But what about the role of human oversight in all this?
That's a critical question. AI should augment human intelligence, not replace it.
Right. We want to make sure that humans are still in the loop.
Exactly. We need to design AI systems that are transparent, explainable, so that humans can understand how they work, why they're making certain decisions. And we need to establish clear lines of accountability so that humans are ultimately responsible for the decisions made by AI.
So it's not just about making AI more ethical, it's also about ensuring that humans remain in control.
Exactly. AI is a powerful tool, but it's just that, a tool. It's up to us to decide how we use it and to make sure that it's used for good.
Okay, so we've talked about the dangers of model collapse, the importance of addressing bias. But before we move on, I want to take a moment to reflect on the bigger picture here. AI is evolving at an incredible pace. It's already having a huge impact on our lives. So what are some of the key takeaways that you think our listeners should keep in mind as they navigate this increasingly AI-infused world?
That's a great question. I think the most important takeaway is that AI is not a neutral technology. It reflects the values, the biases of the people who create it, who use it. So it's crucial that we're aware of those biases and that we work to mitigate them.
All right, we can't just blindly trust these systems. We need to be critical thinkers. We need to ask questions.
Absolutely. And another important takeaway is that AI is not a magic bullet. It's a powerful tool. It can solve a lot of problems. But it's not a panacea. We need to be realistic about its capabilities, about its limitations.
So finding that balance, embracing the potential of AI while also being mindful of the risks.
Exactly. AI has the potential to make our world a better place, but it's up to us to ensure that it's used responsibly, ethically.
Well, those are some wise words to keep in mind as we move forward into this, brave new world of AI. But before we get too lost in all the existential pondering, let's take a quick break and come back for our final segment. We'll explore some potential solutions and ponder what all this means for the future of AI. We're back and ready to dive into some solutions for this model collapse thing. We've talked about data provenance, continuous learning, but what are some actual steps we can take to, make a difference?
Well, one idea that's getting a lot of attention is this concept of data provenance tracking. It's like, imagine giving every piece of data a digital birth certificate.
Okay, so we know if it was made by a human or by AI.
Exactly.
So we could filter out the AI-generated stuff and make sure new models learn from, real human experiences. But how would we even do that?
It could involve using things like cryptography, watermarking, even blockchain. It's a complex problem for sure. But being able to trace the origins of data would be huge for preventing model collapse.
Yeah, it would be a game changer. But what about all the data that's already out there? Can we even go back and figure out what's human and what's AI?
Actually, researchers are developing tools to do just that. They analyze the data, look for statistical patterns, signs of AI involvement.
So we're teaching AI to spot its own creations.
In a way, yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
What else can we do to combat model collapse?
Well, alongside provenance tracking, we need to focus on creating more robust and adaptable AI models. That's where continuous learning comes in, allowing models to update their knowledge, to change as the world changes.
So instead of just training a model once and, calling it a day, we need to teach it to be a lifelong learner, to constantly update its understanding.
Precisely. It's tough developing algorithms that can learn new things without forgetting the old stuff. But it's really important if we want AI systems that can keep up with the world, that can avoid model collapse.
Right, it's like the difference between a static textbook and a dynamic encyclopedia.
Exactly. And there are some really interesting new approaches being explored. For example, some researchers are experimenting with techniques that encourage diversity, novelty in AI models, pushing them to explore the less common data.
So instead of just sticking to the main roads, we're sending AI out to map those uncharted territories.
Exactly, and those explorations can lead to some really amazing discoveries. But we can't just focus on the technical stuff. We need to think about the ethical side, the societal implications of all this.
Right, making sure that AI is being developed and used responsibly.
Absolutely, that's where AI governance comes in, establishing guidelines, regulations for responsible development. It's about setting standards, requiring transparency, even creating ways to hold AI systems accountable when they cause harm.
So like building an AI constitution to make sure it's used for good.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And this constitution needs to be flexible, adaptable, because AI keeps evolving.
Sounds like a huge task.
It is, but ultimately it's about ensuring that AI serves humanity.
Not the other way around.
Exactly.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive. We've explored the problem, talked about the risks, even looked at some potential solutions. But like you said, conversation's not over.
Definitely not. This is just the beginning. AI is changing our world fast, and we need to stay informed, engaged.
So to our listeners out there, stay curious. Keep asking questions. And don't be afraid to challenge those assumptions about what AI can do, about what it should do.
AI is a tool, and it's up to us to use it wisely.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into model collapse. Until next time, stay curious.